Thank you. Well, we are grateful to you, Dr. Tronick, for your availability to an interview.
Thank you.
Okay. I know your work and your contribution to mutual emotional and behavioral regulation that you give. Reading your consideration on meaning maker and on dyadic expansion of consciousness, there are some questions about the concept of consciousness, awareness, knowing, and knowledge. You wrote, meanings are both self-organized, regulated internally, private, dyadically organized, etc. A self-organized meaning, when are made, the individual's state of consciousness change. The problem is, if some meaning are unknown, how could they be conscious as well? And if some sensimotor or procedural patterns are necessarily implicit, how could they become state of consciousness by means of self-organization? I think this concept can be misunderstood. I need some clarification and some explanation in comparison with the Freudian concept of conscious.
Yes.
Could be interesting. Thanks.
I think it does need clarification. Part of the reason I use the word consciousness is that as an infant researcher who looked at the neurobehavioral organization of infants, newborns, we talk about states of consciousness, but we're talking about states of sleep, states of being alert and awake, and even states of distress. And what we mean by that is that there's an organized set of physiologic, behavioral, and experiential processes going on in each state, so that when the newborn is asleep, there's one pattern of the EEG, there's one heart rate, breathing is of one kind, and the kind of information that the sleeping infant is able to process is very limited or very specific information. Whereas when they're alert, they're able to process much more information and attend to the world. So when I first used the term state of consciousness, it was because for me, it had a particular meaning in relation to the newborn. But it is in some ways a problem, because consciousness implies both awareness, and I think it even implies some kind of self-reflective ability. And that isn't really what I mean by the term. Might be a better term might be to talk about a state of being or a state of organization,
Exactly.
which could be conscious and could be in awareness, but also could be completely out of awareness, but nonetheless organizing how we are in the world.
Interesting. Exactly. Do you think that this concept of being could be connected with some philosophical term? For example, Heidegger being or Dasein means the experience to be alive, to be self. Is a completely different perspective from Freudian conscious, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with this?
Well, I don't know that I agree or disagree. I don't delve deeply into
the question,
into philosophy, but my colleague and friend Carol Gilligan, who has written about
you quote in your work,
right, has written about
the psyche and
yes,
Aphrodite.
Yes, and she talks about psyche and Aphrodite, and that what we need to do, she says, what we need to do is to experience pleasure. But by that term, she means, I think, more in a way what Heidegger means, that we feel alive, we feel like we're expanding. We feel robust, and I think Carl Jung used the term numinous experience.
Yeah.
And I think that too refers somewhat to what Gilligan is talking about, the feeling of aliveness and pleasure. And in the model that I have, where I talk about the dyadic states of consciousness, but let's say dyadic states of being together, I think what I'd like to capture is that feeling of the numinous, the feeling of the pleasure that's talked about.
Light on the matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And the idea that there's conscious experience that is really a particular, and it's a different phenomenon. I don't disagree.
Completely
with it.
different.
Right.
Okay. Speaking about you said self.
Mm-hmm.
I reading your papers, I know your exactly when you insist on meaning making.
Mm-hmm.
I would say your psychoanalytic stance is a sort of hermeneutics, because it's connected to meaning explanation plus self-theory, plus rooted in infant research culture. 3 points: hermeneutics, self-theory, infant research. Do you agree with some kind of interpretation of your stance in psychoanalytic field? Or
This is very good, because this needs correction, or it needs to be qualified as well. The term meaning is also a problematic term, because we think of it as being highly cognitive, whatever. The other words that we sometimes use, that we've talked about, are like knowing. We talk about implicit knowing, or we talk about knowledge, or we talk about making sense of the world. What I want to capture with the term meaning is something I think that Lou Sander would talk about, which is that the whole individual, the whole organism, the whole system is well organized and coherent in terms of how it is interacting in the world. And in that interaction with the world, in some sense, it's making meaning about the world. I know what to do here. I know what's going on. I understand what will happen next. But it's not always that I'm consciously aware, or that I can put it into words. Jerry Bruner used to talk about what he called raw, uncooked, raw intentionality. And what he was doing was talking about the 6-month-old infant who is looking at an object that's, say, in front of them, and they're going to reach for it. But they don't really know, they're not aware that they're going to reach for it. If I hold up something for you and say, reach for it, you're fully aware of what I'm telling you. But what Bruner was saying was the baby sees the object, their whole being gets involved in reaching for the object. And it's not until they get the object that they know really what their intention was. So he talked about it as being raw. I think when Dan Stern talks about raw experience, in some ways he's referring to the same kind of thing, where you're engaged, you're active, but you're doing things, but you're certainly not aware of exactly what it is that you are doing.
Now, your working on meaning making could be more connected to more than historical reconstruction to a reconstruction or meaning of the patient to be more connected with a sort of hermeneutic approach or
with a social
hermeneutical approach. Meaning is the center of psychoanalysis more than reconstruction in every stage of the baby, etc., etc.
Well, I think you're right in that it could be more connected. It can be connected to the hermeneutic approach, but systems theory helps us get out of this problem. And I'll tell you what problem I was in a way trying to solve. The hermeneutic, or the person who's completely constructivist. For them, in that situation, to be extreme, there's no reality. It's only the text, right? It's only the narrative structure. That's extreme, but let's leave it at that. The systems theory says that the organism has to be engaged with the world. So it makes an assumption, it's a given that the world is there. And that what the organism is doing, what the biological organism is doing, is getting energy, like food, and getting information from the world to build a sense, or what I call a state of consciousness.
This is something with the Gibson approach we spoke about in your seminar.
Right.
Gibson affordanza is very not well known in Italy. I know it through Rizzolante mirror neurons. Environment as its meanings. This is the center, I think.
Well, for me, as we talked about, I studied with Gibson when I was first in graduate
Boston
at Cornell. He was at Cornell
University,
right? And he hadn't yet fully formulated the affordance theory. That came a little later, or he was kind of working on it. The idea of the affordance is very much, I think, an idea that I like, because what it says is that the organism is looking at the world, and the world presents you with possibilities that you can act on or not act on. So some things are almost like Newtonian physics, like we look at the floor and it looks solid, so I feel like I can walk on it. Part of my work in working with infants and parents was the idea that maybe the communication, facial expressions, gestures, vocalizations, also had information in them that provided affordances. So when the parent smiles or the parent reaches out to you, it's saying something like, I'm willing to interact with you. And then the infant or child is seeing that, perceiving that, and sees it as an affordance to interact with someone. And I think what we've seen in terms of infant research...
Mirror neurons experiences seem to confirm the theory of affordances. Because the perception of the neurons is on the whole, is entirely, is complete, it's not part by part.
Right, but I think what mirror neurons, from what I think is in a way more than, say, Gibsonian ideas about affordances, is that the idea of mirror neuron says you appreciate the intentionality of what you're watching.
Globally.
That's right, globally. Right, and think how fundamental that is to any kind of interaction that you would have.
Last question about infant research. Okay. Do you know the common mainstream psychoanalysis is to reduce the entire adult adolescent psychopathology to the first 12 months of life? I really appreciated your position with explaining the cause of a scientific an evidence-based methodology in baby and child development. One important thing you say is it's difficult to see how the mother-infant relationship could serve as a prototype. Okay. Now, or do you think that infant research could be integrated in psychoanalytic training for few main things? Give some new, up-to-date information to psychoanalysts or the real and evidence-based development of child. The second question is, there are too many developmental theories in psychoanalysis contrasting each other. Don't you think the evidence-based development of child could be a clear cut of the many theories? I'm referring to Occam razor.
Yes.
Cutting the bush of too many theories. What do you think about it?
I think there are too many theories. And at the same time, I think the problem is not only that there are too many, but there's, particularly within psychoanalysis or the schools or theories of psychoanalysis, is that people have an idea that's, I think, really brilliant, right? The idea that there's projection. Okay, so we believe in projection and we become Kleinian, right? Or we believe that it matters what your drive state is, in classic Freudian sense, right? And then we believe, so then we only believe in drives, or we believe in defenses, in the different defenses, like in ego defense analysis, right?
Or in psychosexuality.
Right. And we say, oh, that explains everything. From my perspective, many of these ideas are very powerful ideas, and some of them are, I think, better ideas than quote-unquote science. The neurosciences, for the most part, are very linear, and when they talk about the unconscious, they just mean out of awareness. Whereas when psychodynamic or analysts talk about the unconscious, there's the out of awareness, but there are also the dynamic unconscious, which has conflicts and repression and denial, all sorts of things are going on. I think that's a real phenomenon, and yet the neurosciences don't really explore that kind of phenomenon. So it's not just evidence. I think the problem for psychoanalysis is a little like tribes or incest. Right? Rather than saying, oh, in this situation, projection is the problem, or in this situation, transference is the problem, or let's see if that's what's going on. The infant research can give you a sense of some of the capacities that infants have or don't have. So, for example, a 6-month-old infant, when I did the still phase, or work with depressed mothers, the 6-month-old infant reacts very much to what the parent is doing with their behavior and what's going on. And they're very sensitive to that. But by the time a child is a year of age, even if the mother is sensitive, but she's generally depressed, the child is now very aware that she's depressed. And so, in a sense, there's been a developmental change, and the child is reading the parent's mind. It's like Meltzoff's work, where the child is reading intentions. The 6-month-old is quite different. It's almost a different species than the 1-year-old. the science can help us think about that. So then when we talk about, in psychoanalytic theory, we talk about forming prototypes. We can say, well, if the infant has a prototype, it's going to be very different than the prototype that the 1-year-old has or that the 5-year-old has, because development keeps on going. Often psychodynamic theory loses the dynamic. Like attachment theory, I think, has lost the dynamic. That it's become sort of fixed, or you have very structural interpretation rather than ongoing process interpretations.
Then those social data are useful for training, for integration of theories, don't you see?
Oh, yeah. I would think so. But what's important is not to just become, especially around technique, is not to become eclectic theoretically. I think we still need a framework to organize these things. So I like systems, open systems theory, because I can talk about defensiveness. I can talk about dissociation and make sense of it within the theory that I'm talking about. And in that way, I think it's very powerful. But if I don't have that kind of theory, then what I'm left with is saying, oh, this patient dissociates. Well, and someone next to me says, no, this person's just in denial, or whatever.
I understand. For such could be a new frame, right? A new organized theory and data psychoanalysis, integrated with the other.
And I think psychoanalysis really has a history in which, especially now with the more relational view of it, and what I think of as the sort of Kleinian tradition, which is very process-oriented and very much oriented towards change and to processes that lead to change.
Okay. Thanks for your answers.
Oh,
we are very, very grateful.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.